seagull. I'm a 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 seagull.
Welcome to What's That Smell?
Hey! Greetings, mates, and welcome aboard the old VHS pirate ship, and Happy New Year! Well, you know, honestly, I really don't like New Year. I sort of hate New Year's. I don't know, I just kind of think it's depressing. But I hope you're having fun. And how was your Christmas? Was it fun? Was old Santa Claus good to you? He sure was to me. Let's take a look.
Santa Claus brought me not just Police Academy, but all of the Police Academy movies on VHS. And they're still sealed. And I got this little gem right here. It is a Back to the Future 2 video store promotional pin. And this was to be worn by the video store clerks as part of their flair. Woo! Well, I got this little beauty, and it's an inflatable Star Trek IV The Voyage Home promo item. Very cool little gem right here. But you know, I'm having a hard time keeping it inflated. There's a leak somewhere I can't quite locate, and that's a problem we all have when we get older.
Which we all know is the supreme Star Trek movie. Anyways, New Year's means new beginnings and New Year's resolutions. My New Year's resolution is to finally organize my tape collection.
As I stared into the abyss stared back. Yep, what a mess. This is pure and utter chaos. No organization whatsoever. One of these days, I'm gonna get organized. But it is not this day. Yeah, anymore, I don't even remember what I have. And I sure do have a lot. But what is interesting is the fact that I bought most of these at thrift stores. I wonder if I have any New Year's movies. Not that I could tell. I can't find anything anyway. Ah!
I wonder if there even is any New Year's movies. Certainly there must be. I know. Let's ask VC Arnold. Hey, VC Arnold.
I am VC Arnold.
Happy New Year, VC Arnold.
I am a VCR. Whether a year is new or old is irrelevant to me.
Well, that's a bit of a nihilistic approach, but whatever. Hey, say, do you have any New Year's resolutions?
Yes, I'd like to finally work up the courage to talk to that hot Betamax player that works down at the library.
A Betamax player that works at the library? What? I gotta hear more of this. You got... Well, hey, little creep.
Hi, Captain Adam.
Jeez, what's the matter with you? Why are you so mopey? Have you been listening to your Lionel Richie records again?
No, I mean, yes, but I'm depressed it's New Year's.
Yeah, me too. I know what'll cheer you up. How about a joke? So, a skeleton walked into a bar and...
No, anything but the skeleton joke.
All right, I'm sorry. Hey, you want to play a little Bad Dudes?
No, even bad dudes won't help.
Well, say, I know you like horror movies, and it's New Year's. Maybe there's some New Year's horror movies. Hey, VC Arnold, is there any New Year's horror movies?
Yes, there are a variety of films that could be considered New Year's horror movies. Gosh, an episode about New Year's horror movies might help.
Yeah, VC Arnold, do you think you could whip up an episode real quick? Hey, all right. Hey, look, it's the I Hate New Year's Extravaganza. Look, this just says New Year's bullshit. Well, this ought to make us feel better, little creep.
Yeah, maybe.
Well, let's take a look.
Can we still play Bad Dudes later?
Yeah, we will, sure. Anyways, mates, Happy New Year, and though we're pretty bummed out about it, doesn't mean you have to be. So enjoy today's episode, and I hope you stay safe out there. So, yo-ho-ho!
Time for the show.
That's better, little creep. Yar!
Yar. Happy New Year! Nah, I'm just kidding. I don't give a shit about New Year's. I hate New Year's. I mean, come on, it's depressing. The holidays are over. We have a long, dark winter ahead of us. Yeah, man, after Christmas is over, everything's a bummer. Think about it. Just a week ago, you were saying goodwill toward man, and now you want to behead someone because they didn't use their turn signal. Fucking you go into a store, and the Christmas stuff that they have left, which was once glorious and beautiful, is now more than half off and looks pathetic and miserable on the store shelf because they gotta make room for their fucking Valentine's Day stuff. And I hate Valentine's Day more than New Year's. Now, I know I'm being kind of a Debbie Downer here, but that seasonal depression is kicking in hard. I'm in one of my moods. I'm just a big fan of Christmas, and it's always depressing when it's over. And that's what New Year's means. It means that Christmas is over. But it also means new beginnings. And in a couple days, I'll be over my funk. Hey, I'm only human, and humans do what humans do, and one of those things, besides being miserable cunts to each other, is looking for the positive in everything. Which is why we celebrate New Year's and have great parties and stuff. And I know I'm not the only one who's depressed that Christmas is over. Hey, after New Year's, technically, Christmas hasn't even happened yet. So there's that. And New Year's also signifies looking forward to the next great adventure. And you gotta have hope, because without hope, we're all just miserable fucks. So I mean, I say I hate New Year's, but I don't hate New Year's that much. It is kind of fun. It's still a holiday, and though it's not as great as Christmas is, people still try to celebrate it as if it were something great. And some have even tried to make television specials about New Year's. Yeah, I know that's a little hard to believe, considering that New Year's has pretty much no subject matter whatsoever. But yes, there were a few television specials about New Year's. I mean, not many. There was Rudolph's Shiny New Year, which I already talked about in the last episode, and I'm not going to talk about it again. There was Happy New Year, Charlie Brown, which first aired on CBS January 1st, 1986. And I mean, did you know this existed? I didn't know this existed, and I'm pretty sure nobody else does either. Yeah, this is certainly an underplayed Charlie Brown television special, and certainly they were trying to capitalize on the popularity of the Thanksgiving, Halloween, and Christmas Charlie Brown specials. And this one just didn't take off because, well, nobody gives a shit about New Year's. I mean, sure, they kinda do, but not in the same regard that you should have a television special for it. And the plotline for Happy New Year, Charlie Brown is pretty much the same as the other Charlie Brown specials. You know, where everyone's a total prick to Charlie Brown, especially the chicks, who are insufferable, snotty twats. Oi, snot twat! Though this one is sort of different because Charlie Brown, and only Charlie Brown, has to write a book report over Christmas break for some reason. And there's a New Year's party involved, and I don't know. Yeah, I don't really care, and it doesn't seem like anyone else does either. And I'm not entirely sure if Apple acquired the rights for this one too. I mean, probably not. They probably didn't care to have it, so fuck it. But it was released on home video in 1987, and in 1994, Paramount Home Video acquired the rights to this. And they would release it again in 1996, only this time it's in a kid's clamshell. So even though this is a Charlie Brown special that clearly no one gives a shit about, it still had 3 different VHS distributions. So are any of these expensive and hard to find today? Absolutely not. And I'm trying to stay positive here, so I guess this would be sort of neat to have for your VHS collection, if only for the fact that this is really cheap and no one's really heard of this, so this would be a unique addition to any VHS collection. And so that's all from the wide world of television New Year specials. Told you there wasn't many of them. Okay, so we've established the fact that there isn't dick for television New Year specials, but how about New Year's movies? More specifically, New Year's horror movies. Because I sure as shit am not going to be talking about romantic comedies. Go fuck yourself. So today, we're going to take a look at the small world of New Year's horror movies. Because it's today's episode, the Captain Adams VHS pirate ship I Hate New Year's. New Year's Extravaganza. Now, before we go any further, I think it's important to distinguish the difference between a Christmas movie and a New Year's movie. A Christmas movie is not just a movie that takes place during Christmas, but also celebrates and honors Christmas itself. Whereas a New Year's movie is simply a movie that takes place during New Year's. Because much like Christmas, New Year's is a fascinating backdrop to any story. But unlike Christmas, there really isn't any subject matter to work with. Therefore, a New Year's movie is only a New Year's movie because it takes place during New Year's, and it really does not go any deeper than that. Now, of course, this theory also works retroactively and makes movies, quote-unquote, Christmas movies, simply because they take place during Christmas, such as the case for Die Hard 1 and 2, Gremlins, Batman Returns, which have already covered all of this stuff in the Christmas in July episode, which is in the archives, if you wanted to check that out for yourself, because I'm not going to be talking about this again. So a New Year's movie is simply one that just takes place during New Year's, and there really isn't any substance. So two questions here. Why would anyone make a New Year's movie, and how would you make a New Year's movie fun? Well, I guess for shits and giggles, and you make a New Year's horror movie. And some people have done just that, like Terror Train, which was released in theaters October 3rd, 1980. And as the name implies, it takes place on a train. But not just any train, a terror train. Oh, sorry. Yeah, it's a fancy passenger train that's hosting a New Year's masquerade ball. And that, of course, is what makes this a New Year's movie, because you really couldn't tell from the title. I mean, they could have called it something like New Year's Terror Train, but that might have been a bit wordy and sort of overkill, so, you know. So this is an ambiguously titled horror movie that takes place during New Year's. So yeah, it's a New Year's party on a train, and there's a costumed killer on the loose. And this is a totally underrated slasher film. And at the time, slasher films were a budding subgenre of horror movies. And though this movie is actually a bit underrated and sort of forgotten about now, it was mildly successful when it was first released. It was made with a budget of around $5 million and took in $8 million at the box office. And while horror fans enjoyed this film, well, critics shared mixed reviews. Some, such as the Los Angeles Times, praised the film's atmosphere and said it was stylish, scary fun. And some, such as Variety, said nothing more other than the film was competent. Huh, boy, that's about as middle of the road as it gets. And then some, such as the Pittsburgh Press, summarized their negative review of the film, saying only Terror Train, neat name, nothing movie. Ouch. But now you see, I have to argue with that. I feel the opposite way. I think it's a decent movie, but the name is sort of underwhelming. This film stars Jamie Lee Curtis, and this would also help her achieve her Scream Queen status. A Scream Queen is an actress who portrayed multiple female leads in multiple horror movies, playing the role of either the victim or the antagonist. So by this time, she was fresh off the heels of 1978's Halloween and Prom Night, which was also released in 1980, a few months prior to Terror Train. So long before she started doing commercials for yogurt that makes you shit your pants, Jamie Lee Curtis was a horror movie icon, and for all intents and purposes still is. And this also stars David Copperfield. What the fuck? What's he doing in there? Yes, it's a rather odd but also fun addition to this movie. Now, it took a while, but this was eventually released on VHS in 1988 by Key Video. Now, this is an obscure movie, and as I've mentioned before, obscure doesn't always mean rare or expensive, but with horror movies it sure as hell does. Yeah, this VHS is both rare and expensive. If you do manage to track this one down, you're looking at an average of 50 buckaroonies. And this VHS was also released in Canada in 1989, but not by Key Video, by Family Time Home Video. Family Time. What? Why would you... Wow, why would a home video distribution company called Family Time release horror movies? I really don't know. That's like if Ghoulies was released by High Top Video. But anyways, Terror Train is a New Year's horror movie that you really couldn't tell was about New Year's just based on the title. But how about a New Year's horror movie that pulled no punches and came right out of the gate telling you this was a New Year's movie, motherfucker? And we got just that with Bloody New Year. And oddly enough, this was never released in theaters. Instead, it was released direct-to-video in the UK in September of 1987. And then it was released on VHS in the US in October of 1987. And this could possibly be the first ever direct-to-video movie. And if it sounds like I'm just making that up, it's because I am. Actually, the first direct-to-video movie was 1985's Blood Cult, which has absolutely nothing to do with what I'm talking about, so let's move on. Bloody New Year is a spin on the old Haunted Mansion horror movie archetype, though in this case, it's a haunted hotel. And this movie doesn't really take place during New Year's, but since it's a haunted hotel, the main characters get trapped in a time warp that involves New Year's Eve. Look, you really just have to watch the movie for this to make sense, okay? This movie was also called Time Warp Terror. Now, most horror fans enjoyed this movie, but much like Terror Train, the critics had a field day tearing this one apart. And the adjectives were flying, silly, cheesy, goofy, brutally terrible dialogue, plotless, pointless, a feeble dump bin video quickie. Wow. Though it's not all bad, it has been said that this movie is a traditional haunted house flick in the interior and a traditional zombie flick in the exterior, and that this film is well done and gives you a genuine air of discomfort. Now, when I was a kid, creeping through my local video store, I would always see this movie on the shelf, and I would be pretty scared of it. There's just something very unsettling about a skull with eyeballs. Ugh. And the UK poster is also some pretty scary shit. Note the difference between the two. Anyways, as I had mentioned earlier, this was released on VHS in the US in October of 1987. And since this is a bit obscure, and also since this is a horror movie, then you might have guessed that this VHS is very rare and fucking expensive. Now, I did manage to find someone selling a Blockbuster Video previously viewed copy for $20, but it doesn't have the original sleeve, which takes away from its shelf aesthetic. But I suppose it would be okay if you just wanted to watch this, or you could simply take $20 out of your pocket and set it on fire. Yeah, older horror movies on VHS are just very, very pricey. If you're a VHS collector, then you're already aware of this. And if you're just trying to get into VHS collecting, well, I wouldn't start with horror movies. And let's bring it back to Blood Cult for a second. The average price for this is around 50 buckaroonies. And I found someone selling what appears to be a Japanese release of this for 170 buckaroonies. So anyways, let's move on to another New Year's horror movie where there's no mistaking what this movie is about, with New Year's Evil. And this one actually was released in theaters. It was released December 19th, 1980. Boy, I tell you, it seems that 1980 was a good year for New Year's horror movies. I mean, think about it. How often do we get New Year's movies, let alone two of them in the same year? Wow. And this one is another slasher film that adds to the arsenal of the ever-growing popularity of slasher films throughout the 1980s. Hey, it was a very popular subgenre of horror movies, and this stuff was straight-up box office fodder. Yeah, theaters loved these kind of movies because it made them lots of money, and it didn't even matter if the movies were any good, and most of the time they weren't. People would still pay money to see them. There really was a fuck ton of slasher films throughout the 1980s. But really, the only ones people seem to recall nowadays is the Halloween series, the Friday the 13th series, and the Nightmare on Elm Street series. So if you're a fan of the slasher film genre and looking for something a little different, all you have to do is a little digging, and there's plenty to choose from, including New Year's Evil. Now, is New Year's Evil a sequel or any way related to Christmas Evil? The answer might shock you. No, it won't. I'm just kidding. But it is a great question with a disappointing answer. And that answer is no, it's not. But I mean, you can see why people would think that they were related. I mean, the names are so similar. Come on, somebody's ripping somebody off. And it's sort of hard to figure out who was doing it, because Christmas Evil had many names. At first, it was known as You Better Watch Out, and then it was called Terror in Toyland, and they eventually settled on Christmas Evil. And I'm not sure what the timeline is here, because Christmas Evil was one of those movies that had a limited release, where it would be released in one city, and then the next week would be released in another city, and then the next week another city, and so on and so on and so on. And therefore this would be in theaters for a long time. And it was first released in Pittsburgh, November 7th, 1980. I mean, it was released in the same year as New Year's Evil, only 1 month prior to it. And you mix that with the names pretty much being the same, and it's no wonder people thought these two films were related. Plus, Christmas Evil is also a slasher film. But anyways, New Year's Evil was released on VHS and Beta by Paragon Home Video in 1982. And then it was released on VHS by Canon Home Video in 1988. And both of these distributions are rare and really expensive. No! Get right out of town. You don't say. Yeah, I can't even find the Paragon distribution. And the Canon distribution is currently going for $60 if you can find it. And I was able to find someone selling the Paragon Beta distribution for around $60. And since I brought it up, how about Christmas Evil on VHS? This was released multiple times, including a 1992 distribution, which refers to it as Terror in Toyland. And this distribution goes for $90, and the others seem to average around 50 buckaroonies. But Christmas Evil is not a New Year's movie. But Terror Train, Bloody New Year, and New Year's Evil are all New Year's movies because they take place on New Year's, which, as I talked about earlier, is the only factor that makes them New Year's movies, because it's the only factor there is. New Year's movies are bollocks. But that being said, it also means there is one other movie I need to include, and I'm really sorry to have to do this to you, but I gotta talk about Jaws 4. No! Not why? No! Why? Yes, I'm sorry, folks, but I do have to do this because Jaws 4, The Revenge, does take place during New Year's, which is merely circumstantial. It has nothing to do with the story whatsoever. But that's like with any New Year's movie, because New Year sucks. But anyways, Jaws 4, The Revenge was released in theaters July 17th, 1987, and was universally panned as one of the worst pieces of crap ever made. Yes, this movie is absolutely terrible, and everyone knows this. But much like Jaws 3, Jaws 4 was a financial success. And even though both of these films were critical failures, they certainly were not flops. And what's surprising is that Michael Caine is in this. Run, Michael Caine! Get out of the movie, quick! Run! Over there's the end credits, hurry! And he's even said, and I'm paraphrasing here, I know the movie is shit, but I certainly like the big house it bought me. Now, who could argue with that? And they even approached Richard Dreyfuss to be in this, to reprise his role as Hooper from the first movie, to which he promptly said no. No, thank you. Yeah, this movie is shit, and clearly it was nothing more than a cash grab that worked like a charm. It took in over $50 million at the box office, so yeah, it made a lot of money, but also you could watch your dog take a big dump in your yard for free. So this VHS release was inevitable. It was released in 1988 by MCA Home Video, again in 1990 by MCA Universal Home Video, and again in 1998 by, I don't know, somebody. Yeah, I mean, what's up with this? It looks really cheap and strange and like you bought it from the black market. I mean, I don't get this. As shitty as this movie is, it's still a Universal property, so I'm surprised they would let something like this out of their door. But anyways, yeah, you can find any of these pieces of shit very easily and very cheap. Well, that's gonna wrap it up. New Year's is just pretty depressing. I hate New Year's. And talking about Jaws 4 certainly doesn't help. I hate Jaws 4. But I suppose that New Year's isn't all that bad after all. It does mean new beginnings and new adventures ahead of us. And it also means Season 3 of Captain Adam's VHS pirate ship. And 2021 has a lot in store for this show. So I certainly thank you for watching the show and being a fan and subscribing. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please do so. There are a lot more adventures awaiting us on the high seas of VHS collecting, and there is a shit ton more to talk about within the realm of VHS. And I very much look forward to talking about all of it with you. And yeah, I know there were some New Year's horror movies that I left out, but you know what? There's so few New Year's horror movies that I gotta save some for next year's New Year's extravaganza. But you know, all the quote-unquote New Year's horror movies I featured in today's episode could have really taken place at any time of the year. It didn't have to be New Year's. I mean, that doesn't really even matter. Hell, it could have been Bloody Arbor Day, for all we give a shit. Or maybe July 4th Evil. Or, I mean, just Tuesday Evil. It really doesn't matter to the story. But that's a New Year's movie for you, because New Year sucks. But anywho, so thank you for joining me here on deck on the VHS pirate ship for today's adventure, and please hit subscribe. So even though I hate New Year's, I certainly hope you have a happy New Year and a very healthy and prosperous 2021. So be safe out there, mateys. Don't drink and drive. Don't let your meatloaf. And I'll see you next time, only on Captain Adam's VHS pirate ship.